Power and privilege sometimes manifest in the most unexpected ways. One day, 17-year-old Zoe Jackson was met with racist remarks by flight attendants on Azure Sky Airlines Flight 223 and was unfairly removed from the plane. But the cabin crew didn't know who the young woman before them was, or more importantly, who her father was. Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport was busy on a Friday afternoon, as usual. Passengers were rushing here and there with holiday plans, business trips, or simply the hurry to get home. At Gate 23 in Terminal B, boarding had begun for Azure Sky Airlines Flight 223 to Los Angeles. Zoe Jackson was waiting for her turn in the boarding line, putting on her headphones and playing her favorite song. The 17-year-old Zoe was traveling alone from Atlanta to visit her mother in Los Angeles. Her parents had separated 5 years ago, but she maintained good relationships with both of them. Zoe usually lived with her father in Atlanta, but visited her mother in Los Angeles for holidays and some weekends. With her black curly hair, intelligent brown eyes, and confident posture, Zoe was a bright young woman. She was preparing to enter Harvard and was planning to spend this summer vacation with her mother. The school year had just ended, and Zoe thought she deserved some rest after a challenging schedule of classes and exams. When her turn came, she extended her ticket and smiled. "Good afternoon." The gate agent, Melissa, glanced at the ticket, then gave Zoe a suspicious look. "ID, please." Zoe took out her Georgia State ID from her bag and handed it over. "Here you go." Melissa looked at the ID for a long time, then back at Zoe, then back at the ID. "Are you sure this is your ID?" Zoe frowned, surprised. "Yes, of course." "The girl in this ID looks different," said Melissa, with obvious doubt in her voice. "That's me," said Zoe. "The ID was taken 2 years ago. I had straight hair then. Now I prefer its natural state." Melissa pursed her lips, looking unconvinced, but scanned the ticket anyway. "Have a good flight." Zoe was starting to feel uncomfortable, but she was no stranger to such treatment. As a black teen, especially when traveling alone, she often encountered suspicious looks and questioning. Her father had always taught her to keep her head high and be confident. She passed through the boarding bridge and boarded the plane. She found her seat, 12A, window seat, a standard economy seat. Despite her father being the CEO of the company, Zoe usually flew economy class. Marcus Jackson didn't want his daughter to grow up spoiled and privileged. "I want you to see and understand the real world," he would always say. Zoe placed her backpack in the overhead compartment and sat down. She took out a book, Toni Morrison's Beloved. Her English teacher had recommended it for the summer reading list, and Zoe was imagining reading the book by the pool. As the plane began to fill, Zoe didn't remove her headphones but turned down the volume of her music so she could hear if necessary. The middle seat next to her was still empty. Perhaps she would be lucky and no one would sit next to her during the flight. Just as this thought crossed her mind, a middle-aged white man indicated seat 12B. "This is mine, I suppose." Zoe nodded and smiled, then continued looking out the window. The man carefully settled in, fastened his seatbelt, and took out his magazine. Zoe could feel the man occasionally giving her suspicious looks, but she decided to ignore them. The boarding process was completed, and the flight crew began the routine pre-takeoff safety briefing. Zoe turned off her music completely and listened. Everything was normal during this process. 20 minutes after takeoff, the "You may unfasten your seatbelts" sign lit up. Zoe took out her phone to turn on her music. She made sure it was in flight mode. Her father always reminded her of the importance of safety protocols in the aviation industry. Just then, the man next to her signaled to a flight attendant. "Excuse me," he said in a low voice. "This girl keeps playing with her phone. I'm not sure if it's in flight mode." Flight attendant Brenda, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, turned to Zoe. "Young lady, is your phone in flight mode?" Zoe looked up, surprised by the question. "Yes, of course. I'm just listening to music." "May I see it?" asked Brenda, extending her hand. Zoe hesitated for a moment. This request seemed strange to her. Looking around, she could see other passengers using their phones too. "Why? I'm not—" "Show me your phone," said Brenda, her voice hardening. Zoe reluctantly showed her phone. "Look, it's in flight mode." Brenda examined the phone, and it was indeed in flight mode. Okay, but please stop disturbing others. I'm not disturbing anyone, said Zoe, her voice low but determined. I was just listening to music. Look, young lady, said Brenda, lowering her voice but the tone still harsh. You don't want to cause trouble on this plane. Just be quiet and don't disturb anyone. Zoe didn't know what to say. She hadn't done anything, just listened to music. The man next to her looked satisfied and Brenda walked away. Zoe took a deep breath and tried to calm down. She had experienced such incidents before, but each time it was equally disturbing. She reminded herself that this was just a few hours' flight. Soon she would be with her mother. She turned back to her book and started reading, but was having trouble concentrating. Part of her mind was still stuck on the phone incident. The man next to her, while flipping through his magazine, would occasionally steal glances at her. As the flight continued, Zoe tried to keep herself occupied. She had her headphones on, eyes closed, enjoying her music. However, an hour later, flight attendant Brenda came to her again. Young lady, we're receiving complaints. Please turn off your music. Zoe opened her eyes, surprised. What? But You're disturbing passengers around you. Your headphones are leaking sound. Zoe looked around. No one was looking at her. No one seemed disturbed. Only the man next to her was watching with a satisfied expression. My headphones are noise canceling, said Zoe, trying to stay calm. They don't leak sound outward. You can try them if you want. Young lady, I gave you an instruction, said Brenda, her voice hardening. I expect you to comply with it. But this isn't fair, said Zoe, her voice rising slightly. I haven't done anything. Why are you only targeting me? At this point, some passengers had started to look. Brenda signaled to another flight attendant, Jake. Jake approached, trying to assess the situation. What's the problem, Brenda? He asked. This passenger is refusing to follow instructions, said Brenda. She's disturbing other passengers, and now she's arguing with me. I was just listening to music, said Zoe, looking at Jake. I'm not disturbing anyone. Jake seemed to be trying to understand the situation, but Brenda continued speaking. This girl is causing trouble, Jake. The captain needs to do something. I'm not causing trouble, said Zoe, now genuinely upset. Why are you treating me like this? See, said Brenda to Jake. She's raising her voice and causing a scene. Jake hesitated but eventually nodded. Maybe we should talk to the captain. I'm not causing a scene, said Zoe, now trying to hold back tears. Please, I just want to get to Los Angeles. But Brenda and Jake weren't listening. Jake went to the front cabin and soon returned. The captain wants this passenger removed. She's endangering flight safety. Zoe's heart stopped. What? No, I didn't do anything. The passengers around were now openly watching. Some were indifferent, some looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. Please, gather your things, said Jake, his voice a bit gentler but still determined. You need to leave the plane. This is complete nonsense, said Zoe, tears now flowing. I didn't break any rules. The only reason you're doing this— Young lady, said Brenda, raising her voice, you will get off this plane. Either you get up and leave by your own will, or we will remove you by force. Zoe looked around in desperation. Would no one help her? Even the man sitting next to her was now avoiding her gaze, as if he didn't want to see what was happening. Is this really necessary? From a few rows back, a middle-aged woman called out, What did this girl do? This is a security matter, ma'am, said Brenda firmly. Please don't interfere. What security matter? Asked the woman with disbelief. I'm sitting here and I haven't seen this girl disturbing anyone. Ma'am, please, said Jake to the woman. Don't make us do our job. The woman shook her head but remained silent. Zoe looked at the woman gratefully. At least someone had raised their voice for her. Finally, she slowly stood up, trembling. What you're doing is completely racist, she said, trying to keep her voice as controlled as possible. I was just listening to music, just like everyone else. Watch your accusations, young lady, said Brenda sternly. We're removing you solely because of your behavior. Zoe grabbed her bag and stepped into the aisle. Her legs felt weak. She wiped the tears from her face and tried to keep her head high. As she was directed by Jake toward the front of the plane, she could feel people watching her, whispering. This is complete nonsense, said another passenger, a young man. This girl didn't do anything. Please sit in your seat, sir, said Jake to the man. When they reached the front of the plane, Jake began to direct Zoe to exit the plane. This way, please. Before leaving the plane, Zoe took out her phone from her pocket. Her father, Marcus Jackson, was the founder and CEO of Azure Sky Airlines. Zoe usually avoided using her father's position. She wanted to forge her own path, to be recognized for her own achievements. But in this case, the injustice was too great. There's no time for this call, said Jake hurriedly. Leave the plane. I need to call my father, said Zoe, putting the phone to her ear. You can call your father later, said Brenda impatiently. Now go. But Zoe held on to her phone firmly. Her father answered on the first ring. Zoe? Are you okay, sweetie? Said Marcus Jackson, surprised that his daughter was calling at this hour. Dad, said Zoe, her voice trembling. They're removing me from Azure Sky Flight 223. I didn't do anything. I was just listening to music. What? Marcus's voice changed instantly, becoming serious and authoritative. Tell me what happened. Zoe quickly explained the situation while Jake and Brenda waited impatiently. Give me your phone, said Marcus, his voice cold and calm. Zoe extended the phone to Brenda. My father wants to talk to you. Brenda rolled her eyes but took the phone. Yes? Hello, this is Marcus Jackson, said the voice on the phone, founder and CEO of Azure Sky Airlines, and you are trying to remove my daughter from the plane without any valid reason. The expression on Brenda's face changed instantly. Her color drained, her eyes widened. Mr. Jackson, I didn't know. Of course you didn't, said Marcus, his voice calm but threatening. Now I'm going to tell you what to do. My daughter will return to her seat and have a comfortable journey to Los Angeles. And after the flight ends, I want to see you and all other crew members involved in this incident in my office. Do you understand? Yes, sir, said Brenda, her voice shaky and weak. I'm sorry, sir. I'll take care of it right away. Brenda handed the phone back to Zoe, her hand trembling. Thank you, Dad, said Zoe into the phone. I love you. I love you too, sweetie, said Marcus. Call me when you reach Los Angeles. And Zoe, keep your head high. Zoe hung up the phone and looked at Brenda with something resembling a smile on her face. I guess I can return to my seat now? Brenda quickly nodded, her face still pale. Of course, Miss Jackson. Let us show you to your seat. And I'm sorry. Jake was also behaving completely differently now. Ms. Jackson, if you'll allow me, I can carry your bag. As Zoe walked back to her seat on the plane, she could feel the gazes of the entire cabin crew and many passengers on her. Even the man next to her now looked shocked. Ms. Jackson, the man murmured, I'm sorry, You stayed silent, said Zoe, her voice cold. Like everyone else. But it's okay. Justice is harder for some. The man bowed his head in shame. Zoe sat in her seat, fastened her seatbelt, and took a deep breath. As she looked out the window, she could still feel the sense of injustice inside her. Yes, she had gotten her rights thanks to her father, but what if she wasn't Marcus Jackson's daughter? What if she was an ordinary black girl? What would have happened then? A few minutes later, the pilot of the plane made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, we experienced a small delay. We are now heading to Los Angeles. Thank you for your patience. The flight continued quietly. Brenda and Jake were now extremely polite, often asking Zoe if she wanted anything. They offered nervous smiles every time they passed. Zoe opened her book again, but still couldn't concentrate. In her mind, she replayed the course and led up to the incident over and over. What could she have done differently? Could she have prevented the incident? Or were some people's prejudices so deeply ingrained that nothing would have made a difference? The man next to her was now quiet, mostly trying to sleep. The woman a few rows back gave her a supportive look. Zoe smiled slightly and nodded in thanks. When the flight arrived in Los Angeles, Brenda and Jake approached Zoe with tense smiles on their faces. Ms. Jackson, we hope the rest of your flight was comfortable, said Brenda, carefully choosing each word. Thank you, said Zoe simply. But I want to tell you something. You should never treat anyone the way you treated me today. It doesn't matter who my father is. Every person, regardless of their skin color, deserves respect. Brenda and Jake just nodded, their eyes looking at the ground. And Ms. Jackson, added Brenda, we're truly sorry. If we had known, that's exactly the problem, said Zoe with a sharp look. If you had known, but that doesn't justify your behavior. You should treat people based on who they are, not on who they might be. Zoe exited the plane and smiled when she saw her mother. Dana Jackson embraced her daughter tightly. Sweetie, I missed you. I missed you too, Mom, said Zoe, giving in to her mother's embrace. How was your flight? Asked Dana, taking her daughter's bag. Zoe hesitated for a moment. Long story. I'll tell you in the car. When they got into the car, Zoe shared the whole incident with her mother. Dana's face reddened with anger as she listened to the story. This is unacceptable, said Dana angrily. I'll call your father and... Don't worry, Mom, said Zoe. I spoke with Dad. He'll handle it. Good, said Dana, calming down a bit. You know Marcus doesn't tolerate these things. Zoe nodded. Her father was a tough and fair person in his business. He had built Azure Sky Airlines from scratch and turned it into one of the largest operations in air transportation. But he had also always instilled values of honesty, respect, and equality in his daughter. When they arrived home, Zoe immediately called her father and let him know she had arrived safely. Dad, you really don't need to make a big deal out of this, said Zoe on the phone. Maybe just a warning. Zoe, said Marcus, his voice determined, I will not turn a blind eye to this kind of behavior. If they can do this to you, just think about what they might be doing to others. Zoe knew her father was right. Well, what are you going to do? A company-wide change, said Marcus, to ensure this kind of incident never happens again. That night, Marcus Jackson sent an email. There would be mandatory diversity and unconscious bias training for all employees of Azure Sky Airlines. The company published a new mission statement committing to treating all passengers equally and respectfully. And yes, the cabin crew members involved in the incident, including Brenda and Jake, were placed on administrative leave until they completed the training program. Marcus Jackson hired leading equality consultants in the industry to develop a special training program dedicated to his daughter and her experiences. This program, called the Flight Equality Initiative, aimed to combat biases in the aviation industry. 2 weeks later, Azure Sky Airlines organized an open dialogue day for all staff. Marcus Jackson took the stage and addressed the company employees. Today I stand here both as a CEO and as a father, he said, his voice strong and determined. 2 weeks ago, my daughter Zoe experienced discrimination on one of our company's flights. This is unacceptable. As Azure Sky Airlines, we have a responsibility to treat every passenger equally, regardless of their skin color, gender, religion, or other characteristics. The hall was silent, everyone listening carefully. But I'm not here today just to condemn or punish, Marcus continued. Real change comes through understanding and education. That's why we're launching a comprehensive training program for all our employees to understand and overcome our unconscious biases. The program received great interest among employees from its first day. The cabin crew members involved in the incident, including Brenda and Jake, returned to their jobs after completing the training, but now performed their duties in a more conscious and sensitive manner. Zoe, after the incident, began to take an interest in equality issues in the aviation industry. She was actively involved in her father's initiative, mentoring young people and sharing her own story to raise awareness. One day, while giving a talk at a high school in Los Angeles, a student asked her, "Would you have been removed from that plane if they didn't know who your father was?" Zoe thought about the question for a moment. "Probably yes," she answered honestly. "And that's why it's my responsibility to use my privilege to speak for those who can't make their voices heard." This incident was an important lesson for Zoe. Privilege and power carried great responsibility, and perhaps, as Marcus Jackson's daughter, it was her duty to speak up on issues where others couldn't make their voices heard. Now Zoe is conducting a research project at Harvard on equality in the aviation industry and interning at her father's company. Her story became a powerful example of how one person's experience of injustice could turn into a movement that could change an entire industry. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and stay with us for more inspiring stories. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.